Hi, this is Dave Cards. I'm here today to speak on a very important topic for me because it has something to do with my life and things that I've learned through my whole life. The title of this message is Who Has Ownership of the World? And thus, if you have ownership, you rule it. And so this is a question that we must ask. But before we go into this, I'm going to tell you where technically this started. I had been born again for about 8 months. I was overseas. I was in the Navy. I was on a military base, and I was going out into town. And while I was walking alone, I got to a point where I looked up in the sky, and suddenly I saw demons and angels warring with one another in the sky. I mean, there were so many of them, it covered the whole sky. That's all you could see was demons and angels fighting with one another. And then immediately a voice said to me, "You don't matter." And I said, well, wait a second, I do matter. I do have something to do with this war that's going on in the heavens. Now, I was only 8 months old in the Lord. What did I know? I didn't know much of anything. But that was really the beginning of understanding of, or at least directing me into this particular message. So who does have ownership of the world and thus control it? Now, the very first answer would be, well, God does. I mean, because God created everything. And so we see that in Genesis 1:1, where it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, the fact is, God created. And generally, when you create something, you own it. I mean, we could also look at Psalms 24:1 that says, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And so, yeah, to some degree, God owns the world. Psalms 50:10 says, all the animals of the forest and the cattle on 1,000 hills are God's. And if we look at Haggai 2:8, it says all the silver and the gold are God's. So we could say, yeah, God owns the world. I mean, He created it, and it is owned by Him. And yet we need to ask the question, well, if God owns everything, how did Satan get control of the world? Because doesn't ownership indicate control? I mean, because if you look at the world today, it sure would seem like God's not controlling it. Satan's controlling it. And there's many scriptures that talk about Satan as being the owner of the world and the God of this world. But we need to first start here. So God created it, and somehow God lost it. The scriptures say in Psalms 115, verse 16, the heavens are the heavens of the Lord, but the earth was given to the sons of men. Now, this is very important that we understand that. The earth was given to the sons of men. So we ask, well, how did that occur? And by talking about that, we're going to look at Genesis chapter 1. That's where it all began. Verses 27 and 28. It says, God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him, male and female. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So the very first thing that we see is God creating everything. And then He creates man, and He goes down to man, and He says, I'm going to give you authority over all the animals. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean over all the earth. It just means all the animals on the earth. So how did man get authority over the earth? If man did have the earth, because, I mean, after all, Psalms 115, verse 16 says, God's given the earth to the sons of men. Now, we know, basically because we know the story, that God created man and woman and He put them in a garden. And in that garden, God tells them in Genesis 2:15 he says to cultivate it and keep it. And that there's only one rule, not to eat the fruit. So man was put into the garden to cultivate the garden and to keep the garden. So he was given authority. Now, the garden is illustrative of the whole world. So God gives them authority over animals, over all the animal life, and then he turns around and gives them the authority over the garden, or basically over the whole world. Now, within this garden, God didn't micromanage. You know, we all probably have some sort of idea what it's like to be micromanaged, where people watch over everything that we do. They watch over your shoulder and make sure you're not doing anything wrong. This was not the case with God. God did not micromanage Adam and Eve. The fact is, God didn't give them a primer of how to take care of the garden. They could have propagated the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They could have made 50 of them. Or, even better, they could have probably cut it down or burned it or destroyed it, and thus took away any temptation to eat the fruit that they're not supposed to eat. And yet, they didn't do either one of them. I don't think there was any idea that they would sin in their minds, or go against God. And yet we know that they did. They ate the fruit. And the very outcome of eating the fruit was that they fell from the relationship with God. But that's not the only thing that happened. They actually turned over the world to the devil. That's how the devil got control of it. I mean, God would never have handed over the control of the world to the devil. So therefore, it must not have been underneath God's control. It had to have been underneath humans' control. Now, how do we know that? Well, in Romans chapter 8, verses 19 to 21, it says, "The creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subject to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hopes that the creation itself, who also will be set free from its slavery to the corruption of the freedom of the glory of the sons of God." So creation itself is waiting for the sons of God to enter into their glory so that itself can be set free. So all the world, the creation, was put underneath human control. And under human control, and they lost it. They turned it over to Satan when they were listening and became obedient to the devil himself. So let's recap. We see God creating everything. We see God giving the control of everything to what? To humans, over top of the animals, and the world over top to humans. Humans turn around and hand it to the devil. And so therefore we're in the predicament that we are in. Now, so the next part of this talk, will be about, we're going to look at Satan. So does Satan have control of the world? I mean, he did have control of the world. Does he currently have control of the world? It sure looks like he does. It sure acts like he does. All the world, the way the world is going. But we'll have to take a look at that and see. So this is part one of probably a 3-part talk. I mean, it could be longer too. I mean, I could go into a lot of different detail, but I probably won't. It'll be 3 parts.